Hey everyone, what's going on? I figured I'd make a video in relation to the Eagles winning Super Bowl 59. And it's mostly just because the exact narrative that I was talking about with I only made 5 videos last year, I think, but the exact narrative that I was talking about in all of these videos, it all stemmed back to Super Bowl 52, which was the Super Bowl that the Philadelphia Eagles had won. And Super Bowl 52 had a lot to do with kneeling during the national anthem, and it also had a lot to do with the stock market. And it was the 88th anniversary of the stock market crash. And these two things kind of coincided because Herbert Hoover was the president during the stock market crash, and Herbert Hoover was also the president who made the Star Spangled Banner the official national anthem. And in the summer of 2017, before Super Bowl 52, I realized that it was going to be the 88th anniversary of the stock market crash. And in this language of gematria, if you write out Neil, it equals 88. If you write out Colin Kaepernick, it equals 88. If you write out the Star Spangled Banner, it equals 88. Trump equals 88. Also, Herbert Hoover, his initials, HH, and H is the 8th letter, so his initials are a lot like an 88. And the Super Bowl was going to be played at U.S. Bank Stadium. Think about that in relation to money, stock market. U.S. Bank Stadium also equals 88. And it was formerly like the Hubert Humphrey Dome, right? HH. This big connection to the number 88. And it was going to be the 88th anniversary of the stock market crash. And really, the reason I even stumbled upon this narrative was because we had the death of Chester Bennington of Lincoln Park. And I didn't think much of that at the time. But then the very next day, we had the death of the dad on Home Alone. And his name was John Hurd. And I started thinking about how Lincoln Park, Chicago, is where the St. Valentine's Day Massacre happened in 1929, the same year as the stock market crash. And in the movie Home Alone that's set in Chicago, remember Kevin, a big part of it is Kevin has the TV and it's the gangster shooting. And then a few days later, one of the headline stories in the news was that there was a shooting in Chicago at the Jacquees concert, and they called it a gangster shooting. So I was like, there must be something connected to 1929 with the stock market crash and the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And then I learned that the Super Bowl was played at U.S. Bank Stadium. And then recall we got the St. Valentine's Day Massacre at Stoneman Douglas, right after the Eagles won Super Bowl 52, and Stoneman Douglas mascot just so happened to be the Eagle. And Chester Bennington died on July 20th, the anniversary of the Eagle landing on the moon. But another reason why I thought this was important too was because in the second Home Alone movie, it has Donald Trump in it. And right after Kevin sees Donald Trump, only a few minutes later in the movie, can't think of the guy's name, Rob Schneider, the butler guy or the guy taking him to his room. He tells him Herbert Hoover once stayed at this hotel, and then he says, the vacuum guy. So they even bring up Herbert Hoover just minutes after Donald Trump is in the movie Home Alone 2. And just think about the connection to Herbert Hoover, the stock market crash, Herbert Hoover linked to the kneeling and national anthem narrative, and then it was going to be the 88th anniversary of the stock market crash. And then the very next day after Super Bowl 52, this was the headline, market meltdown, right? The stock market had fell like 1,000 points. The Dow fell 1,000 points the day after Super Bowl 52. The exact narrative that I was talking about. And I mean, there was a bunch of other things that kept leading me to this narrative. There were stories about like DMX, the rapper, and how he went to court or something for tax evasion. And I was like, DMX is funny because DMX for tax evasion, and he has an album called The Great Depression. And even in my town, a synchronicity, a guy named Dick Randall died, and he was the guy who owned the community bank in town. So the guy who owned the bank died, and there was this big narrative with banks and money and stock market. And you see the story Market Meltdown. If you go back and look at my videos here where I'm talking about Donald Trump, the assassination attempt of Donald Trump, I'm talking about how it's related to the stock market like crazy in a bunch of these videos. And then on August 5th this year, we got more stories about market meltdown. Markets are melting down, and then Kamala Harris, she hadn't picked her vice president pick yet, and it came down to two guys. I can't remember the other guy, but Tim Walz won, right? And Tim Walz was from Minnesota, where U.S. Bank Stadium was, and she announced this in Philadelphia, once again reminding me of Super Bowl 52. We even had Nick Foles, the football player Nick Foles, announced his retirement. He was the MVP of Super Bowl 52. And then go back to this story about the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. Just think about that. Francis Scott Key, and once again, the connections to Super Bowl 52. This was also, it hit the bridge, right? The Francis Scott Key Bridge. And remember, Minnesota, I think it's 2007, they had that famous bridge collapse, and the bridge, it fell 81 feet, and the main trusses were 81 meters long, and the story told us that it took the ambulances 81 minutes to transport everyone to the hospital, and it happened on August 1st, which just so happens to be Francis Scott Key's birthday. So I knew there was a connection, once again, to the stock market and so on. And this was and then Super Bowl 52 being held in U.S. Bank Stadium in Minnesota. And then this year we get the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. So I knew there was a relationship to Super Bowl 52 somehow. So I basically knew that there was something important to Super Bowl 52 with the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, but I didn't really think about it being connected to Super Bowl 59 at the time. But then in June, we got the story about the death of Donald Sutherland. Notice he died at the age of 88. But just days before this, we also had a story about Justin Timberlake getting a OWI. And this stood out to me in relation to Super Bowl 52, which I even blogged about in here. Francis Scott Key Bridge, Super Bowl 52, all this stuff with JFK and the JFK assassination and how it was related to Marilyn Manson. And Marilyn Manson had this video about the Donald Trump assassination. He made a video with Donald Trump's head blown off in 2017, right? And then less than a month later, we have the Donald Trump assassination attempt. But the point that I'm making, Justin Timberlake, Donald Sutherland dying, if you go back and look at my videos from October and November of 2017, just before Super Bowl 52, I was talking about both of these guys, right? Justin Timberlake was announced to be the halftime show at Super Bowl 52. And Justin Timberlake even connected to Francis Scott Key because remember when he showed Janet Jackson's boob in the Super Bowl halftime show? She was singing songs off her album called Rhythm Nation 1814. And that's the year Francis Scott Key wrote the national anthem. People even pointed out how Rhythm Nation is R and N, and R is the 18th letter and N the 14th letter, 1814. But 1814, the year that Francis Scott Key wrote the national anthem. So what a perfect guy, and Justin Timberlake to do Super Bowl 52 in relation to the kneeling during the national anthem. And what's even funnier is a few days before this at work, I noticed that one of these donut trays has the number 1814 on it. And I started thinking about Francis Scott Key and Justin Timberlake, and then a few days later, Justin Timberlake gets arrested. It's just the dumbest thing, just synchronicities. But sometimes I don't even think it's me. I think something divine is guiding me to understand some of this stuff. But Donald Sutherland dying was important because around this same time in 2017, where I'm blogging or making videos about these connections, I noticed this big pattern with the movie Stand By Me. And part of it was because Marilyn Manson was injured in a gun prop fell on Marilyn Manson, and he had to miss 10 shows. And he was releasing his 10th album in the 10th month. And the main song on this album was actually called Say 10. Say and the number 10, right? A play on the word Satan. But in the language of gematria, if you write out Satan, it just so happens to equal 10. Satan equals 10. And notice that God equals 10, right? And in the lyric, he says, you say God, and I say 10. So he's saying that because he's using gematria, right? God equals 10. He's saying to say 10, the number 10. Satan equals 10, God equals 10. You say God, I say 10. And this was on his 10th studio album that came out in the 10th month, October, after he got injured by a gun prop, and he came back on the 10th show later. And for years, we had in the gematria community, we talked about this narrative with 10 days before and presidential assassinations. And like Abraham Lincoln had a dream 10 days before he was assassinated that he would be shot, or before he was shot, and then he had a dream 10 days before that he'd be shot. And like JFK, like Marilyn Monroe sang to JFK 10 days before his birthday. And think about how Marilyn Manson is named after Charles Manson and Marilyn Monroe. It's a whole lot to re-explain, but just know there was a presidential assassination thing that was linked to 10 days before. And we got Marilyn Manson releasing all this stuff with, the number 10. And his song Say 10, he released a video where Donald Trump's head was blown off and he was assassinated. And then we got the story about Harvey Weinstein in the news in 2017 for Hollywood pedophilia or whatever. And the big person calling Harvey Weinstein out was the actress Rose McGowan, who used to date Marilyn Manson. So I thought that was interesting. And then Donald Trump started releasing the JFK files on October 26th that year. And Marilyn Manson and Rose McGowan actually are in a music video together. It's called the Coma White video. And it is where Marilyn Manson reenacts the JFK assassination. And if you go back and look at the history of this music video, it was in 1999. And they released it after JFK Jr. died in a plane crash. It was originally supposed to release earlier in that year, but we had Columbine, the shooting. And then, of course, Marilyn Manson's his band is originally from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which was right next to the Stoneman Douglas shooting. And Marilyn Manson played a show at the Eagles Ballroom the night before the Super Bowl 52. But the point I'm making is that Rose McGowan was in the news, right? And when I was researching about Rose McGowan, I found out she's in this church called like Children of God or Children of something. And it's the same church that River Phoenix and Joaquin Phoenix were in. That's the church that they grew up in. And then a few days later, we had Jerry O'Connell on the Wendy Williams show, and she collapsed dressed as the Statue of Liberty. And I started thinking, I was like, oh, interesting. River Phoenix, Jerry O'Connell's the fat kid in Stand By Me. And then we got a story about Corey Feldman in the news around the time of the Harvey Weinstein stuff too, because Corey Feldman had started like an Indiegogo campaign against Hollywood pedophilia. So I was like, interesting. Jerry O'Connell is on Wendy Williams' show and she collapses on the anniversary of River Phoenix dying. And then River Phoenix is connected to Rose McGowan here with this JFK assassination stuff with Marilyn Manson. And then Corey Feldman was also in the news. And I pointed out the only people that seem to be missing from the movie Stand By Me in the news are Will Wheaton and Kiefer Sutherland. And then a few days later, I was watching The Big Bang Theory, and Will Wheaton just so happened to be on the episode. That was the only show at the time that I watched every episode of. And Will Wheaton hadn't been on an episode for over a year. So it was strange that on the newest episode, Will Wheaton's all of a sudden on there. And then on November 5th, the day that Marilyn Manson returned after getting injured from his gun prop that fell on him, the big news and the big headline story was the Sutherland Springs church shooting in Texas, right? Sutherland Springs church shooting. I mean, you can't even make this up. And there was also a headline story in the news, I think it was Fox News, where Will Wheaton was under fire because he said that God didn't save people who died in the Sutherland Springs church shooting. So it's like, there's an article about Will Wheaton talking about the Sutherland Springs church shooting. Think about Kiefer Sutherland. Think about Donald Sutherland. Donald Sutherland just so happened to be in the movie JFK. So this is kind of why I knew Donald Sutherland dying was important. And what's even funnier, remember the band A New Found Glory? They had also released a new song just after this. And they went to Stoneman Douglas as high school students. And the music video for that new song they released was a parody of the film Stand By Me. And of course, Wendy Williams was just in the news last November, just before Super Bowl 59, about her aphasia. And remember, right after the Donald Trump assassination attempt, I'll talk about this in a second again, but Marilyn Manson out of nowhere releases a new single on J.D. Vance's birthday, and then he ends up releasing the album on the anniversary of the JFK assassination, and the album's called like One Assassination Under God or something. Yeah, look at this. He releases an album on the anniversary of the JFK assassination called One Assassination Under God. Right after the Donald Trump assassination attempt, he releases the first single on J.D. Vance's birthday. And I mean, it gets even deeper because back in 2017, before Marilyn Manson released the Say 10 song, where he had the animation of Donald Trump being assassinated, he started a tour called the Heaven Upside Down Tour, and it began on the same day that Chester Bennington of Lincoln Park had died. And I'll talk about this later, but both of these bands, Marilyn Manson actually added a girl to the band for the first time ever back in August or whatever with his new single. He has a girl band member, and Lincoln Park now has a girl lead singer. So, and then it was like, while Donald Trump is running against Kamala Harris, who could have been the first woman president, and a whole lot of things. Kamala is really important to the stock market crash stuff with Herbert Hoover. And like I said, I've talked about this in all them other videos if you watch this, but Kamala Harris, she was born on October 20th, 1964, which was the exact day that Herbert Hoover died, the president during the stock market crash. But I'll come back to this in 1 second. There's just one more thing I wanted to point out in relation to that Sutherland Springs church shooting that happened on November 5th. And that was also the day that Marilyn Manson returned after missing 9 shows and returning on the 10th show in 2017. But that was November 5th. And in 2024, the election just so happened to fall on November 5th. So, once again, I knew that it was connected to that same narrative. And there's a whole lot more to this, because the same day that the Trump assassination attempt happened, we had the death of Shannon Doherty, who used to be Luke Perry's girlfriend on Beverly Hills 90210. And Luke Perry's in the film Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And so is Donald Sutherland. And it all had to do with this number 310. And the election fell on the 310th day of this year. And a whole bunch of stuff that I don't want to re-explain. I talk about it in the other videos, but I'm bringing this up because when I first realized this big pattern with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the number 310, it all went back to 2018 when I noticed the story about Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the headline news, and it was on November 22nd, the anniversary of the JFK assassination. And the same day there was a headline story about a 310-mile dust storm, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer equals 310, and it first aired on the date 310, and then Luke Perry died 3 months and 10 days later, and then the main vampire Rutger Hauer died later that summer, just after the Garlic Festival shooting. Think about garlic and vampires, and then Donald Sutherland is the trainer of Buffy in the movie. So I thought it was funny that Shannon Doherty would die the same day as the Donald Trump assassination attempt, and then the election being on the 310th day of the year. Anyway, the point that I've been trying to get across in the first 15, 20 minutes of this video is the fact that I knew there was something important to Super Bowl 52 in this narrative with the stock market crash. And it also, that narrative had Marilyn Manson that was related to like presidential assassinations and Donald Trump. So then when we got the assassination attempt of Donald Trump, I wondered how far away it was from the stock market crash anniversary, and it just so happened to be 3 months and 16 days. So like a number 316. And this stands out to me a lot because I've talked about this number in relation to the stock market crash and Donald Trump and Herbert Hoover for multiple years. In these capital letter ciphers, think about Donald Trump and the relationship to the Capitol insurrection, which I'll talk about later too, but it has to do with that plane crash on January 29th, the beginning of the snake year. And remember the stock market crash happened in the snake year, 9/11 happened in the snake year, Pearl Harbor happened in the snake year, and then we got a big crash of a plane into a helicopter on the anniversary of the snake year. But notice the assassination attempt of Donald Trump was 3 months and 16 days before the stock market crash anniversary. And in these ciphers, Donald Trump just so happens to equal 316. And if you write out Herbert Hoover also just so happens to equal 316. Another thing that came up this year is, I'm not going to re-explain this, but you can watch some other videos because it's too long to re-explain, but we were supposed to learn the importance of the composite numbers. For years, we've talked about prime numbers, and I don't know if it's a divine thing or whatever, but for some reason, we learned the importance of the composite ciphers, and they were super synced up to Donald Trump's assassination attempt and how it relates to Aleister Crowley, the famous, occultist. But in these ciphers using composite numbers, if you write out stock market crash, it also just so happens to equal 316. Another thing that happened to me that furthered my suspicion with this connection is I had just blogged about, Donald Trump and the stock market on July 14th. I just blogged about these connections, the 316 and the stock market, and I went to work the next morning and I had to walk out to our shed. I can't remember what I was doing, getting ice melt or not ice melt. That would be in the summer, but I don't know what I was doing. Oh, there was a road cone or something I had to put in the shed. And I went and put it in the shed. And when I came back out, there was a truck out in the parking lot that said stock market on the side. And I was like, literally just hours ago, before I went to bed, I blogged about the stock market crash and how it's connected to Donald Trump and the assassination attempt on him. And now today I'm walking outside and there's a truck that says stock market on the side. And it just so happens to be a local company called Sullivan's Supply. And Sullivan's Supply just so happens to equal 316. So once again, something was guiding me that yes, you are on the right track with this narrative, The odds that company would equal 316. I've never seen this truck ever, lived here forever. And I just walk out of the shed the next day and there's a big truck that says stock market on the side. And then the company just so happens to equal 316. It's stuff you just cannot make up. And to go along with the other list of 316, Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance as his vice presidential candidate. J.D. Vance's birthday is August 2nd, which just so happens to be 316 days before Donald Trump's birthday. And in relation to Marilyn Manson and his video Say 10 with the assassination of Donald Trump, Marilyn Manson, out of nowhere, releases a new single called As Sick as the Secrets Within. And he just so happened to release that on J.D. Vance's birthday, August 2nd. And Marilyn Manson's real name is Brian Hugh Warner, that equals 316. Marilyn Manson also named after Marilyn Monroe, right? And Charles Manson. And think about Marilyn Monroe with the JFK assassination. And she's saying to him 10 days before his birthday. But Charles Manson, his real name, Charles Mills Maddox, equals 316. And he was also born on the 316th day of the year. And if you go back to 2017, when I was talking about all the stuff with Marilyn Manson, in October, I was also mentioning how I thought the kneeling during the national anthem was synced up to Charles Manson because of Marilyn Manson, and it had to do with his helter-skelter theory about black people rising up. Think about black people kneeling. Helter-skelter is about black people rising up. And then Charles Manson ended up dying on November 19th that year, and everybody thought I was just crazy. It was like, Charles Manson dies right after talking about how this big narrative, I think, is synced up to Charles Manson, and then he ends up dying on November 19th. And remember I said that Marilyn Manson he released another video just after this called Raise the Red Flag. And I noticed that he had a girl in the band now. He's never had a girl in his band ever over all these years, but now he has a girl in the band. Just like how Linkin Park has a girl, a lead singer now that replaced Chester Bennington, but this girl's name, let me find it here. Her name's Reba Myers. Reba Myers equals 316. And the Lincoln Park girl, let me find her really quick. Lincoln Park girl, maybe. Lincoln Park's new singer, Emily Armstrong. Look at her name. 316 in the composite number cipher. So her name equals 316. The girl in Marilyn Manson's band equals 316. Marilyn Manson releases his first new single in years, and he releases it on J.D. Vance's birthday, which is 316 days before Donald Trump's birthday. Donald Trump equals 316. Herbert Hoover equals 316. The assassination attempt was 3 months and 16 days before the stock market crash. I see the truck that says stock market on it the very next day from a company, Sullivan Supply, that equals 316. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. You also had the Joe Biden. He dropped out of the election, right? He dropped out of the election on September 21st, which just so happens to be 3 months and 16 days before the election. So Joe Biden dropped out 3 months, 16 days before the election, right after all these 316s with Donald Trump. You know, then you also had Kamala Harris, right? Her, when she picked the vice president candidate, these were the people. It was Josh Shapiro and Tim Walz. And the reason I actually didn't think it was going to be Josh Shapiro because of this number 316. Josh Shapiro just so happens to equal 316. But it's all right. Like I said, it's okay. Because the narrative is still about Super Bowl 52 because she ends up picking Tim Walz, who was from Minneapolis, right? The governor of Minnesota, and she announces it in Philadelphia that was linked up to Super Bowl 52 of the stock market. But what are the odds that the other guy that she's going to pick, his name equals 316, you know, this number connected to the same narrative with the stock market? And what are the odds that if you go from Kamala Harris's birthday to Super Bowl 52, it was 3 months and 16 days? 316, once again, connected to Super Bowl 52. And this number 316 that's important to Donald Trump, Herbert Hoover, the stock market crash. Then we get the Eagles who go on to win the Super Bowl. There's another interesting narrative here with Pope Francis, because Pope Francis, he's currently 88 years old. That number important to Super Bowl 52. And Pope Francis was 81 years old. He turned 81 years old before Super Bowl 52. And then think about Francis Scott Key's birthday being on 8/1. That was connected to the, Minnesota bridge collapse that fell 81 feet on 8/1. And the word pontiff actually equals 81, I think. And pontiff means bridge builder. Think about the bridge collapses. I'll have to go back and look, but I feel like the Golden Gate Bridge turned 81 years old that year as well. I think the Golden Gate Bridge was 81 years old. Golden Gate Bridge, I think, equals 81 in gematria. Pope Francis, named after St. Francis of Assisi, who San Francisco is also named after. But I'm bringing this up because Pope Francis's birthday was 316 days before the stock market crash anniversary. And his birthday was also 316 days after Super Bowl 52. So 316 days after his birthday is the stock market crash, and 316 days after Super Bowl 52 was his birthday. So this number 316 connected to Pope Francis. And it's interesting because Donald Trump and Joe Biden met Pope Francis as the president connected to the stock market. Joe Biden even met him on October 29th, the anniversary of the stock market crash. And it's all linked up with Squid Game. And they just released the new Squid Game, but Trump met Pope Francis 4 years, 5 months, and 6 days before Joe Biden met Pope Francis as the president. Biden met him on the anniversary of the stock market crash. And on that same day, we got a story about Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds in the headline. And think about Herbert Hoover, the only president from Iowa. But Kim Reynolds became the governor of Iowa the same day that Donald Trump met Pope Francis. And 456 is the big number in Squid Game that all has to do with money and the giant piggy bank. So it's an interesting time for them to release the second part of Squid Game just before Super Bowl 59. Also, Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential election 456 days before Kamala Harris's birthday. So if you go 456 days later, it takes you to Kamala Harris's birthday, the same day that Herbert Hoover died in history, October 20th, which is also the same day that the Nicholas Cruz, the shooter of the Stoneman Douglas on the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, right? Stoneman Douglas, right after the Eagles won Super Bowl 52. That's also the same day that he pled guilty to shooting at Stoneman Douglas. And of course, if you go from the anniversary of the stock market crash to Valentine's Day, the same day as Stoneman Douglas, it's 3 months and 16 days. Think about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, the same year as the stock market crash. And in relation to Pope Francis, 1929 was also the year that Vatican City was established. And the number 29 is also very important to the stock market crash. And like Donald Trump's assassination attempt was 29 days after his birthday, right? And think about the stock market crash that happened on 10/29 of the year 29, right? October 29th of the year 29. This is interesting because the 10th prime number just so happens to be 29 even. So 10, 29, 29. It was the only president from Iowa, Herbert Hoover. And Iowa is the 29th state to join the Union. Iowa has Interstate 29 that goes all the way through it from north to south. Kinnick Stadium, where the Hawkeyes play, was built in 1929. Think about Marilyn Manson and the number 10. And once again, 10 and 29. And think about how this year, the Super Bowl just so happened to fall on the date 2/9, like 29. And if you go back and look at all my posts and stuff, I was also talking about this big thing with the Chinese snake year and how it began on the 29th day of 2025, 1/29. So the 29th day of 2025. And we got that big plane crash, right? But just recall, the Chinese snake year, it happened, the stock market crash happened during the Chinese snake year. Pearl Harbor happened during a Chinese snake year. 9/11 also happened during a Chinese snake year. That's what I was pointing out last summer. And then we got that, the death of Kobe Bryant's father. Kobe Bryant's father just so happened to die, or they reported him dead on National Snake Day. I don't know if I put it in here. Let's see if I can find it here. Well, I don't know if I have it in here, but, right here. Kobe Bryant's father, they reported him dead on World Snake Day. Think about Kobe Bryant, who's a native of Philadelphia, and he died in a helicopter crash, right? Think about how the Black Hawk hit the airplane. But Kobe Bryant, his father died on World Snake Day, and Kobe Bryant's nickname is the Black Mamba, which is a snake. Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles in 2013, which was a Chinese snake year. The day before Kobe Bryant died, LeBron James surpassed Kobe Bryant in scoring in Philadelphia, of all places, and there's a snake logo on the basketball court, and LeBron James went down and stood on the snake logo after he surpassed Kobe Bryant. Then Kobe Bryant dies in a helicopter crash the next day. And if you go back to 2019 in July, I made a video about the Lakers signing DeMarcus Cousins and how I thought the whole season was going to be scripted around Kobe Bryant and his Achilles injury, because years before this, I had documented how DeMarcus Cousins tore his Achilles on January 26, 2018, and how it was related to Kobe Bryant tearing his Achilles. And then Kobe Bryant ends up dying on January 26th after I said I thought the whole season was going to be scripted around Kobe Bryant and his Achilles injury that was linked up to DeMarcus Cousins tearing his Achilles on January 26th. I guess moral of the story, isn't it just interesting that there was a plane crash on the first day of the Chinese snake year? They crashed into a helicopter. And he even had stuff like, on the anniversary of Kobe Bryant dying, there was the Philadelphia Eagles tweeted this. They made an animation with a helicopter and some guy yelling, "Go Birds," on the anniversary of Kobe Bryant dying in a helicopter. Kobe Bryant, once again, the Philadelphia native, dies after LeBron surpasses him in Philadelphia and goes down and stands on the snake. Then on the first day of the snake year, a Black Hawk helicopter supposedly hits an airplane, and the airplane was called the American Eagle flight. American Eagle. And you'll understand here in a second what I'm getting at, but let me just find the post here. It was the American Eagle flight. Just want to point it out. Where did it show? American Eagle Flight 5342. So you knew that it was synced up to the Super Bowl, and the Eagles being in the Super Bowl. There's more to it that I'll come back to in relation to Ronald Reagan and the Eagles. But the very next day, then we had the plane crash in... Where did it go? Wasn't it the very next day we had the plane crash in Philadelphia? So once again, you knew that it was connected to the Super Bowl. It's like, connected to Kobe Bryant, the Eagles. Then the next day there's a plane crash in Philadelphia, of all places. And this plane crash was a Learjet. The second one was a Learjet. Let me find that here. Well, the first plane crash, the one that into the helicopter, it was leaving from Wichita, Kansas. And the second plane crash was this one, and it was a Learjet 55, right? The one that crashed into Philadelphia. If you look up Learjet, it's headquartered in Wichita, Kansas. So this plane headquartered in Wichita, Kansas, the other one coming from Wichita, Kansas. And would you believe that Wichita just so happens to be in the 316 area code? Right? 316. This number connected to Donald Trump, the stock market, Super Bowl 52, the Eagles won. They also said that the first one, the big deal, was all of the passengers that were figure skaters, right? That was a big deal with the figure skaters. And right away, when you think about figure skaters, don't you think of like Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, and Tanya Harding getting the guy to club Nancy Kerrigan in the knee, right? Think about the kneeling during the national anthem. But the interesting thing about that was the very same day as this plane crash, Tanya Harding decided to tell everybody that she was joining social media. So Tanya Harding joined social media the same day as the plane crash that had all the figure skaters on it. And when you look up Tanya Harding, her birthday, November 12th, the 316th day of the year. And she even pled guilty to a plea bargain on March 16th, 1994, 316. And if you go from Nancy Kerrigan's birthday, October 13th, to the day of this plane crash, it was 3 months and 16 days, right? And then Wichita, the 316 area code. This attack also happened on January 6th, reminding us of the Capitol insurrection. And the other one happened near the Roosevelt Mall, which, let me find that here, but President Roosevelt, he just so happened to die on January 6th, right? The same day as and his birthday is October 27th. That's the day that Philadelphia was founded. That's the day that leaves 65 days in the year. And in gematria, if you write out Philadelphia just so happens to equal 65. And this is why the other airplane crash near Ronald Reagan Airport was so important. Ronald Reagan, he died on June 5th, 6/5 in 2004. And notice his birthday was February 6th. Go to the 2005 Super Bowl, the next Super Bowl after Ronald Reagan died. Just so happened to be the Eagles and the Patriots. The Eagles and the Patriots, just like Super Bowl 52. And it was held on February 6th, so Ronald Reagan's birthday. So Ronald Reagan dies on 6/5. How Philadelphia equals 65, founded on the day, leaving 65 days in the year. Then the Eagles make the Super Bowl that next year. and it's on Ronald Reagan's birthday. They also compared all them figure skaters dying in the plane crash. They compared that to, there was a plane crash in 1961 right here. Sabina Flight 548. That's what they kept comparing it to. And that crash happened on February 15th, 1961. And that was just months after the Eagles had won the NFL championship game, December 26, 1960. You know, in regards to presidential assassinations, too, with the Eagles, the Eagles play at Lincoln Financial, right? And Abraham Lincoln just so happened to be assassinated with a gun called a Philadelphia Derringer, right? Well, I spelled it wrong, but however you spell it, Lincoln was assassinated with a gun called a Philadelphia Derringer. And, you know, it's interesting. The Eagles play in Lincoln Financial. The Super Bowl was in the Caesars Superdome, right? Think about Julius Caesar, political assassinations. I mean, and of course, think about figure skating, think about ice, and think about all the ice raids that were going on in the news at the time. And then we got the death of another Dick Button or something. Dick Button, the skating great who died at age 95. What are the odds that this guy would die right after a plane crash with a bunch of figure skaters? I mean, it's just insane. The Potomac River even equals 65, right? Where the plane crashed. And then, of course, think about it. A plane crash on the first day of the snake year. And then, who's in the halftime show? Who's the halftime show? It just so happens to be Samuel L. Jackson. He's in the halftime show, the guy who's in the film Snakes on a Plane that came out the same year. He was in another movie called Black Snake Moan. Snakes on a Plane. Right after the plane crashes on the anniversary of the Snake Day beginning or Snake Year beginning. And to go along with exactly what I'm talking about, notice his birthday, December 21st. If you go from Super Bowl 59 to his birthday, 316 days later. Of course, too, if you write his name out, Samuel L. Jackson, it equals 87. He was doing the halftime show with Kendrick Lamar, who equals 87. Philadelphia Eagles equal 87. Their star quarterback, Jalen Hurts, born on August 7th, 87. And this type of stuff happens all of the time. Samuel L. Jackson's other movie that came out that year, Black Snake Moan, also has Justin Timberlake in it. You know, the Super Bowl 52 halftime guy. You know what? In relation to Pope Francis, I was going to bring this up earlier, but, you know, Pope Francis being 88 years old, I'm just now thinking of this, but, you know, think about Kobe Bryant too, and in Genesis, how the snake will bite the heel. Think about Kobe's Achilles. There's something important to that, you know, the snake ear. The Eagles could have became 666 and 666 with a loss if they would have lost in the Super Bowl. You know, once again, Philadelphia comes from the book of Revelation, just like the number 666 we're told about in the book of Revelation. It's just an interesting thing to think about in relation to Satan and the serpent and the snake year. But in relation to Pope Francis, the day that Donald Trump met Pope Francis was May 24th, 2017. And if you go from the Super Bowl this year to that day, it's 3 months and 16 days. So possibly a day to pay attention to, you know what I mean? Seems, I don't know. It's just interesting how it's related to the stock market stuff. And then 3 months and 16 days after the Super Bowl, this day is again. So hopefully you get the gist of why I thought it was important to Super Bowl 52. There's a lot of connections to Super Bowl 52 and how it relates to the stock market crash. Plus, you know, the plane crash on the first day of the snake year. I mean, all these things just interrelated, you know. And I didn't necessarily predict the Eagles would be in the Super Bowl because I knew it was just connected to Super Bowl 52. I didn't really start thinking it was for the Eagles until about just before Christmas when my band played at the Eagles Club. And I thought, what are the odds of this? But I'll explain this in just a second. But it possibly could have been for the Vikings where Super Bowl 52 was held as well. But I did end up betting $50 on the Eagles, but I'm just making the point that it's more about the narrative. This knowledge doesn't necessarily predict who's going to win all of the time. I mean, there's been a million times where a team that I've followed ends up making the Super Bowl and then losing, but the reason I was following that team, something in connection to that narrative would happen. So you never know. The Eagles could have lost, and there could have been a headline story about a bridge collapse in Kansas City that day, or a big bank robbery in Kansas City. But it's always connected back to that narrative, you know? So, but there were so many things that were pointing me to the Eagles that just made me think it had to be for the Eagles this year. And once the Vikings lost especially, it was like, no, it has to be for the Eagles. There's all of this symbolism to the Eagles and Super Bowl 52. Like I said, I was even having like just weird synchronicities. I had synchronicity with clown, and it made me think of ICP and corn and these old memories I had with my cousin Jacob, right? And then a few days later, I ended up playing a band gig at the Eagles Club in Missouri Valley, Iowa. And there was a girl there that I talked to who I always thought was related to my cousin Jacob, but it turns out she's not related to him. She's like the sister to his uncle, if that makes sense. But for some reason, I always thought that that was like his cousin or whatever. But it was interesting. I had just blogged about my cousin Jacob. Then I see this girl who I haven't seen in years at the Eagles Club. And my cousin Jacob's lives in Kansas City. And then on New Year's Day, the big story was that truck ramming in New Orleans on the day of the Sugar Bowl, what Notre Dame was going to be playing in. And what's interesting about Notre Dame is the fact that I have old blog posts talking about an eagle that landed on a fan at the Notre Dame game or whatever. So I was like, an eagle landing on a fan. There has to be something to the Eagles with this. And I went on Facebook that day, and believe it or not, my cousin Jacob's sister, she just so happened to be, well, if I can get there, she just so happened to be in New Orleans, and she was right next to where this truck ramming happened. But they went to the hotel like an hour before it happened or something. So I was like, what are the odds that my cousin Jacob's sister was in New Orleans the day of this truck ramming, and she was right in the area where it happened? And they're both from Kansas City, but it really just seemed to go back to me meeting that girl who I thought was related to them at the Eagles Club, right? And talking to that girl. And it's just funny to me that then the Eagles go on to play the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. It could have possibly been the Bills, too. Because think about how Donald Trump once tried to buy the Buffalo Bills. Think about money and bills, and Donald Trump lied about how much money he had when he was trying to buy the Buffalo Bills. So, I mean, there's a lot of interesting narratives that were going on there. My cousins also grew up in St. Joe, Missouri, which is where Eminem is from, and we just had the death of Eminem's mother. So I was like, these guys are connected to the Super Bowl in some way. But usually when it's connected to these, it's been connected to my cousin Jacob before, and the Kansas City went on to win the Super Bowl too, so. But it seemed to me that it was something to do with Eagles, especially when Notre Dame was playing, and I have this old blog post about how an eagle landed on a fan at the Notre Dame game. Also think about how Notre Dame went on to the championship, but this happened in New Orleans, this truck ramming. And New Orleans, you think about that with France, and the Notre Dame Cathedral in France had just reopened, right? So the Notre Dame Cathedral just reopened, and then we get Notre Dame and this truck ramming, then Notre Dame's in the national championship. But back in October, I even documented about Notre Dame for the fact that there was this story about Garth Brooks in the news, and how he was being accused of sexual assault, which once again just reminded me of, Harvey Weinstein in 2017, this big old thing with all these sexual assaults and whatever. But remember, Garth Brooks played at the Notre Dame College, and it was live on TV. I think it was December of 2018. And then in April of 2019, the Notre Dame Cathedral burnt down, and everybody was standing outside watching the fire. And Garth Brooks even played the song Standing Outside the Fire while he was at Notre Dame. And that was 134 days after Garth Brooks played, the Notre Dame Cathedral burnt down. And if you write out Garth Brooks, he equals 134. So back in October, when I saw this story about Garth Brooks, it made me think of that. And then I got on Facebook, and one of my Facebook memories was about asking if anyone had any Garth Brooks MP3s or CDs I could use. And another memory was a joke about Rudy being on Comedy Central and how Notre Dame football is pretty funny. Or something, I don't even know. But I'm just saying, I had one about Notre Dame, and I also had one about Garth Brooks. And I mean, these two things were related years later. And then Garth Brooks is in the news, so it made me just wonder about Notre Dame back then. And then they reopened the Notre Dame Cathedral. Then Notre Dame went on to have this attack happen just before the Sugar Bowl. Then they were in the championship. And I'm bringing this up just in relation to France. If you write out France, France also equals 29, right? Like how the Super Bowl was on 2-9, and so you do the stock market stuff. And Donald Trump assassination attempt was 29 days after his birthday. If you write out just Trump, it equals 29. There was all kinds of stuff. The Eagles won the Super Bowl, and they got their 29th all-time playoff win. But Andy Reid could have got his 29th win, and Patrick Mahomes is 29 years old, and you know, there's a whole lot that goes with it. Actually, I have an old video from like 2014 where 29 was really big with Kansas City as well. And back in 2014, just before game 1 of the World Series, I have a video on here somewhere, but they started off with a promo, and it was like, Pythagoras said numbers rule all things. You know what else numbers rule? Baseball. And then they went on this big old thing about how Kansas City hadn't been in the World Series for 29 years, and they have Interstate 29 that goes to Kansas City and a bunch of stuff. And I was like, man, this number's even connected to the Kansas City Chiefs that way. So once again, you're like, are the Chiefs going to win, or is it going to be for the Eagles? You know, but it's still interestingly enough related, you know. Exactly what you're talking about is connected to this. Just like the one year when I was following the Yankees and the Twins, and it was 2017, and it was all to do with the number 84. Tons of stuff with the number 84. Then the Yankees and the Twins ended up playing each other in the wild card game, and the Yankees won 8-4, like 84. You know, I didn't know. I thought the Twins were going to win it, but they didn't win. But they won. They lost by the exact thing that I was talking about with them all year. But anyway, you know, my thoughts for this were just seemed like there was too much going on for the Eagles. Like I had too many synchronicities playing at the Eagles club, and then this eagle landing on the Notre Dame fan, and I was scrolling through Facebook one day, and my friend shared a post about an eagle, and then Joe Biden made the bald eagle the official national bird. I was DJing one night, and some girl told me that, and I was like, it wasn't it always? And then I looked it up. I was like, no. Joe Biden actually made it official that the eagle is the national bird. It was right around the day before Christmas, I think it was. And then we got the death of Bill Burgee, the former Philadelphia Eagles guy. He died on Christmas, and his birthday just so happened to be February 9th, the same day as Super Bowl 59, you know? So an Eagles player dies, and his birthday is the same day as the Super Bowl. Then we later had Cooper DeJean, who turned 22 years old on the same day as the Super Bowl, and then gets a pick 6 in the Super Bowl. Also, Saquon Barkley's birthday was that day. Think about Cooper DeJean being 22 years old. If you write out Eagles equals 22. But the interesting thing about Cooper DeJean is the fact that he actually grew up just a few towns away from where I live. And that town was very important I always talk about my Uncle Barney dying in a car crash and how it's linked up to a ton of things, but my Uncle Barney died just before He got in a car wreck just before Odebote, Iowa, which is where Cooper DeJean grew up and went to high school. And, the mascot is the Falcons. And my Uncle Barney died just before the Atlanta Falcons were in the Super Bowl. And my Uncle Barney had gave me this Dan Marino jersey before he died. And I was following stuff with The Simpsons and Donald Trump because I pointed out how there's an episode of The Simpsons where it has the first woman president is president after Donald Trump. So I looked up The Simpsons to see if Dan Marino was on any episode, and it just so happened to be the only episode Dan Marino is featured in on The Simpsons is one that aired the same day as Super Bowl 33, where the Falcons were in the Super Bowl, And it was just the strangest story I've ever heard. Like, he had cancer and he was going to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and on his way home, he just decided to go off the highway and go in the wrong direction from home and wrecked his truck, and then he ended up dying at the Creighton the next day. And I thought maybe he had a stroke or something which would make him drive off the main highway and wreck or something. I mean, this is a story I was told, and it makes zero sense to this day. Like, why would he just drive off in the wrong direction? It makes zero sense at all. But he died the next day at the Jesuit hospital, Creighton, and he was a 4th-degree Knight of Columbus and a bunch of stuff. I'm not blaming it all on the Jesuits, but there's some interesting things here. But the point I'm making, I got a letter in the mail that same day that he died. And it was express shipped. Like, they sent, I don't even know what it was. They had to spend like $20 to send me this big letter in the mail, basically telling me to quit making YouTube videos and believe in God, And it was like, that's crazy, And then I had all this stuff with the angel Gabriel going on at the time, like that Simpsons episode with Dan Marino was season 10, episode 12, and there was all kinds of stuff with Dan and Daniel, and my name is Daniel, so I read the book of Daniel 10:12, and it's where the angel Gabriel is telling him that he's coming to help him understand and, understand his visions and dreams and stuff. That letter also had $300 cash in it, which I don't know, it's just the strangest thing. I get a letter with $300 cash, tell me just believe in God, and it's the express ship it. It comes the exact day my uncle dies at the Jesuit hospital. That's why I started following the Jesuits a whole lot. But as I've studied this a lot more, I've learned that just because it's connected to the Jesuits, it doesn't make them necessarily responsible. But anyway, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because after Super Bowl 51, where the Falcons lost to the Patriots, it was February 11th, 2017. I had went to my grandma Murphy's house, who lived right behind my house. And I went to my grandma Murphy's house, and my sister and my Uncle Clancy were there. And my Uncle Clancy was talking about how my Uncle Barney's autopsy came back, and he didn't have a stroke or anything. He ended up just dying from the injuries that he got in his automobile accident, right? And I thought to myself, that's the weirdest thing. So if he didn't have a stroke or whatever, then why did he drive off the highway in the wrong direction and wreck his car? It just doesn't add up to me. It doesn't make any sense. But of course, I didn't really say anything. I was just like, oh, okay, and went on. But it's crossed my mind forever. Like, why would he do that? It doesn't make any sense. And maybe I was told the story wrong too, but that's what I was told, that he drove off the highway and he was going in the wrong direction and he wrecked his car, and then he died from the injuries the next day. And anyway, later that day, as we were sitting there, my sister was telling a story, and I found out that she lives on Falcon Avenue. She lives probably 40 minutes away, and I didn't know where she lived. I'd only been to her house a couple of times, and she lived on Falcon Avenue, and I was like, that is weird. Right after the Falcons, and Barney dies right by Odebote, where the Falcons are playing and stuff. And then I found out she owns a company called Eagle Acres. And I was like, okay, Eagle Acres. And I'm finding this out at my grandma's house, and my grandma lives on Eagle Street. And my Uncle Clancy was interesting because his oldest son, Ryan, he was the only Philadelphia Eagles fan that I knew at the time, right? And this was just after Super Bowl 51. So my Uncle Clancy's son, Philadelphia Eagles fan. My sister owns a company called Eagle Acres. And I'm at my grandma's house on Eagle Street when I find all this out. So I didn't really think too much of it because it was right after Super Bowl 51. But I thought it was kind of interesting. I was like, huh, all this Eagle stuff. And it did cross my mind. I was like, maybe there's something important to the Eagles in the next coming season. Maybe, I don't know. Just following this narrative. And I kind of just paid attention to it over the year. And then we got the story of Donald Trump calling out the kneeling during the national anthem on September 23rd that year, which the date can be written 23/9, like the number 239. And this was interesting because the original flag was sewn at 239 Arch Street in Philadelphia. And Donald Trump's birthday just so happens to be June 14th, which is Flag Day. So we knew there was something important to the Eagles then. And believe it or not, the very next day, my Grandma Murphy died, right? My Grandma Murphy, who lived on Eagle Street, she died the very next day. And then, so, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff too. Like, for years, I've been following this narrative with earthquakes in Philadelphia. And it was connected to this thing with Michael Jordan and how the capital of the country, Jordan, used to be called Philadelphia until it was destroyed by earthquakes. And remember last time the Chiefs and the Eagles played, there was the big earthquake in Turkey, which is where the biblical Philadelphia is. And then we had an East Coast earthquake that year. And then this year we had the New England earthquake, right? Just before the Super Bowl with the Chiefs. Remember, New England is who played the Eagles in Super Bowl 52. But just before Super Bowl 52, there was also an East Coast earthquake. And it was in November, and it was a 4.1, I believe. Can't remember the magnitude, but there was an earthquake. I think it was a 4.1, and then the Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl with 41 points, and the word Super Bowl equals 41. So there's this thing with earthquakes and Philadelphia, and that all stems back to the movie Happy Gilmore, where Happy learns how to putt on the earthquake golf course, and the building that falls over has the cube on the top that looks like the Comcast Center in Philadelphia. So it's interesting they're now making another Happy Gilmore movie. But to stay on topic with what I was talking about with my grandma, my sister, and my uncle, my grandma dies the day after Donald Trump calls out the kneeling. And then a little bit later, I found out that my sister's town, Audubon, Iowa, was going to be featured in a Super Bowl commercial. They have like a giant bull statue called Albert the Bull. And, it was a play on the Super Bowl and the Super Bowl. But once again, what are the chances my sister's town, a small town in Iowa, is featured in a Super Bowl commercial that year? After, I find out she owns the company Eagle Acres. Further, that town, if you look it up, it's named after a guy, I think his name's James John Audubon. And that guy is famous for writing a book called The Birds of America, which is the eagle. And then a month later, a girl from my sister's town ended up dying in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, in like Falls Park something. And the area where she fell in the water and drowned, the last person to die there from drowning was a guy named Lyle Eagletail. And then on April 17th, after Super Bowl 52, my Uncle Clancy ended up dying, right? He, right around Christmas that year, all of a sudden he couldn't breathe and his lung collapsed, and he ended up having some fungus on his lung that they couldn't get rid of, and he ended up dying just after Super Bowl 52. So my sister's town was featured in the Super Bowl commercial. A girl from her town goes on to die, and the last person to die in that same spot was a guy named Lyle Eagletail. My grandma, who lived on Eagle Street, died that year. Further, we had the Stoneman Douglas shooting right after the Super Bowl 52 that the Eagles won. The Stoneman Douglas Eagles. My Uncle Clancy's son, the only Eagles fan that I know named Ryan, he just so happened to live a half hour away from Stoneman Douglas at the time. So it's like, what are the odds of all these things happening? My cousin Ryan lives like a half hour away from Stoneman Douglas, then his dad dies, all connected to Super Bowl 52. And even funnier is now my cousin Ryan has since moved back to Dunlap, and he works at the bank, like of all places. He works at the UBI bank where I bank now. And once again, I'm talking about this big number 316. Look what happens when you write out Grandma Murphy. That's what I always called her. Grandma Murphy, 316. My Uncle Clancy, Clancy Murphy. I can't even spell it here. Clancy, his name equals 316. His son, Ryan, 316. Ryan was born on July 7th, and my Uncle Clancy was born on March 22nd. So Ryan was born 3 months and 16 days after Clancy's birthday. 316. They both equal 316. My Grandma Murphy's name equals 316. You know, the only one that doesn't fit is my sister, and I don't know. But it's still interesting. But another reason I'm bringing all this back up, because once again, it was related to Super Bowl 52. My, later, after I went to my grandma's house that day, February 11th, 2017, I'll hopefully leave a little clip or whatever to show you what I'm talking about, or show you the blog post, but later after going to my grandma's, I went to a birthday party for my cousin Abe's wife at the Twisted Tail in Beebeetown, Iowa. Real small town, whatever. Another interesting town because I saw a UFO there the night before 9/11, and all these drones that have been in the sky lately, like in New Jersey and whatever. The sky was lit up like that night too. Like it just has reminded me of that, and I blogged about that earlier this year too. But I went to my grandma's, then I went to a birthday party later that night for my cousin Abe's wife. And would you believe that the day of Super Bowl 59, my cousin Abe's, his shop and some of his equipment, it all burnt to the ground, right? And what's even more interesting is that Abe and my sister's husband, they're like good friends and their businesses are like kind of coincided. I don't know exactly how it works, but their businesses are like connected. They do similar things, and I don't know if my sister's business is kind of like it got like somehow was created off of my cousin Abe's business or something of the sort. I don't know all the details, but just know they're related somehow, and my sister's husband is good friends with my cousin Abe, right? So just what are the odds my cousin Abe's shop would burn down the day of Super Bowl 59 when I'm talking about all this stuff connected back to that one day at my grandma's house? It's craziness. And I mean, I'm not even gonna lie, I even blogged about him. I blogged about exactly what I'm talking about back in like April. So I was like talking about Philadelphia here even. Let's see here. Because Mariah Carey's mom and sister both died too this year on the same day. And Mariah Carey, if you go back to what I was talking about 2017, Mariah Carey was all linked up to the kneeling during the national anthem and this narrative with Charles Manson. That's how I figured out the whole Charles Manson narrative. It had to do with Mariah Carey because she was like drunk singing singing at New Year's Eve, and the very next day they had a story of that right next to a story about Charles Manson, and in the story they compared Mariah Carey's performance to Janet Jackson showing her boob at the Super Bowl halftime show or whatever. So I knew there was when Justin Timberlake was announced as a halftime show and there was the Marilyn Manson, Charles Manson stuff, I knew that it was related. And then Mariah Carey's mom and sister both die on the same day and whatever else, but right here, I don't know what day that was, but August 27th, I'm talking about Karanzan, or however you pronounce it. Because when I saw a UFO in Beebeetown, Iowa, where this birthday party was years ago, and it was on Highway F66, right? 6. F is the sixth letter, so 666. And I can't even remember it all. There's something to do with Karanzan and Aleister Crowley and how it was like three, important to the number 333, and if you write out Philadelphia Eagles, it equals 333 and a bunch of stuff. But I'm talking about this blog post, which was from the same day that I found out my sister owned the company Eagle Acres and so on. And like I'm even posting about my cousin Abe, whatever else. I just want to put it out. So I was even talking about how I thought he was connected back in August. And there was a kid that worked for him that ended up like dying, or I think he committed suicide. And I guess I never really looked that much into it, but The twisted tail where that birthday party was equals 333. And look at that, Super Bowl 52. So there's, I don't know. It's crazy that the Eagles would go on to win the Super Bowl, just like Super Bowl 52, connected back to all these things. Just now other things that were going on that day are connected to this Super Bowl. It's like every time the Eagles are in the Super Bowl, there's all these weird ass things that go back to that one day. And, that day was also February 11th. And like if you read out Grandma Murphy, well, I thought her name equals 211, like February 11th, right? Clancy Murphy, 211, like February 11th. Ryan Murphy, 211, like February 11th. I mean, isn't that weird? My girlfriend's uncle even died in November, just before the Eagles won Super Bowl 52. Now I'm thinking about it. My girlfriend's uncle Jim, he died just before the Eagles won the Super Bowl. And then when the Eagles played the Chiefs in Super Bowl 57, her grandma died like the day before the Super Bowl. Like, you just can't even make it up. And my girlfriend's only uncle that's left, he lives near Underwood, Iowa, and I'm pretty sure the mascot there is the eagle. I could be wrong, but pretty sure the mascot there is the eagle. I think that's where my brother's kids go to school as well. So, just interesting. Another interesting thing in relation to that number 211, look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump also equals 211. And the Super Bowl was just 211 days after the Donald Trump assassination attempt. 211 days after the Trump assassination attempt. And look at the shooter. Look at, he was wearing a shirt with an eagle on it. You know what I mean? He was wearing a shirt with an eagle on it. 211 days before the Super Bowl. Donald Trump equals 211. All these other things with eagles. Joe Biden making the eagle the official national anthem. If you go from the anniversary of the stock market crash to Super Bowl 59, it's 103 days. And if you write out stock market crash, it equals 59 and also 103. Think about Super Bowl 59 being 103 days after the anniversary of the stock market crash. And we're also in the Chinese snake year. We have these airplane crashes that are linked up to the number 316 that's important to the stock market. Samuel L. Jackson. There's even more that goes along with this too in relation to money, because if you look up Cooper DeJean, although he went to school or whatever, he grew up in Oldebo, Iowa. It says that he was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And this only sticks out to me because I had recently had a band gig at my cousin's wedding, and I finally met my cousin's uncle, her mom's brother. And if you remember back in, I don't even know what year it was, 2015, my cousin's uncle was a principal in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and a kid shot him in the arm. And that was the headline story of the news. And forever, back then it was like, oh, the kid's name was Mason Buell, like Mason symbol, and so on. But after I met this guy for the first time a little bit at that wedding, and I just can't imagine him even knowing anything about this, honestly. It doesn't make any sense, This world, while there is a cabal, that is for sure, there is something, not all these things are just rituals of the cabal. There's a lot of these things that you can't prove one way or the other. If this is happening to me, all these Eagles things, my grandma dying, my uncle dying, my sister's town being connected, how can you go on and then say that, like, all these celebrities, like Patrick Mahomes' grandpa dies, and that's a ritual? There's no proof. There is a connection, but you can't just make numbers and correlate it to mean that the Freemasons are behind it or whatever, because it's mysticism. I know a lot of people just can't wrap that around their brain, but, it's interesting, though. I meet this guy. He got shot in Sioux Falls. It was like the 273rd day of the year. They said it was the 273rd school shooting since a certain time. Uh, it was on 273rd Street, and like Sioux Falls, South Dakota equals 273. But I met that guy just before the Super Bowl this year. And then Cooper DeJean has that connection to what I'm talking about. Even my coworker even went to the same high school as Cooper DeJean, my coworker Heather. And I'm just trying to piece it together. Sioux Falls is where that girl drowned from my sister's town after Super Bowl 52, where Lyle Eagletail was the last person to drown. And a few years back in 2022, I was talking about how I was going to go skiing, but it was way too expensive. So instead, we went to some dinosaur exhibit in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And when I was there, when we were leaving the dinosaur thing, I forgot all about the story, to tell you the truth, this girl drowning. And we were driving over this thing, and it said Falls Park. And I was like, why does that remind me of something? And I went home, and I looked at my blog, and I was like, oh, that's where the girl drowned. Holy crap. This girl drowned in Sioux Falls, right at the spot. But if you go back to the time when I was talking about this, February of 2022, everything I was talking about had to do with money and drowning. Just think about that with stock market. And Time magazine had Donald Trump drowning in the Oval Office at one point. I can't remember what year that was. That was like the cover of the magazine was Donald Trump drowning in the Oval Office. So there's definitely something going on with money and how it all relates. And I mean, even back then, in 2022, February 2022, where did I put it? Maybe the Philadelphia Eagles are important again. Something with Eagles, as it was a big theme with this, right? And then what happened? The Eagles went on to go to the Super Bowl the next year to play the Chiefs in 2023 or whatever, right? So I made this blog post in 2022 in February, just like all the stuff that happened in February of before Super Bowl 52. So maybe if I see symbolism in February, that is the symbolism to pay attention to in regards to the winner of the Super Bowl. And, another reason I even think this is because, look, I was connecting this school shooting to Philadelphia back in 2015. So I was connecting this to Philadelphia even. Then I meet this guy just before the Eagles are in the Super Bowl. Then Cooper DeJean was born in Sioux Falls. So it just seems that there's something important to that. But it all relates back to money, the same theme that I've been talking about this whole time. Also, looking at the gematria of Sioux Falls equals 184. And this number is a number I've been following with a pattern in relation to father symbolism. And there's some interesting things, but father reminds me of priests and the Pope. And remember, Pope Francis has a whole lot of connections to Philadelphia, such as he became the Pope on 3/13 of 2013. 313 is the 65th prime number, like how Philadelphia equals 65, founded on the day leaving 65 days in the year. Remember, there was the Philadelphia train wreck that was all synced up to his visit to the United States in 2015. Just before I was talking about this shooting in Sioux Falls. And that train wreck happened at 9:23 p.m. And then Pope Francis arrived in America on his 923rd day as Pope, and a whole bunch of other things. Train wreck equals 923. The movie Trainwreck came out that year with LeBron James, who equals 923. And the movie starts with Amy Schumer's character being 9 years old, and the rest of the movie takes place 23 years later. But remember, Pope Francis finished that trip by going to Philadelphia and giving a speech on Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address lectern, right? So he left Philadelphia on the night of the fourth blood moon of the Tetrad. So it just seems there's something important to Pope Francis and how it relates to that father symbolism. And a big number that I've followed with the father symbolism as well is the number 624. And almost every year I feel like I follow the date June 24th in relation to the father symbolism. It has to do with bridge collapses. And when my Uncle Clancy and my grandma died, they died like 6 months and 24 days apart. And my Uncle Clancy's birthday was 6 months and 24 days before my birthday. And my son was born in the mix of that. And he was born, I can't even remember. He was born 6 months, 24 days after 6/24. And the day my son was born, I had synchronicity with the TV and Rocky. And, think about Rocky or Sylvester Stallone from Philadelphia. My son was born just before Super Bowl 52. And my son and my dad are connected to this drowning narrative. My dad can't swim and is all related to this number 624. The word drowning even equals 624. The word father equals 624. But I'm bringing this up in relation to Pope Francis because in 2018, after my uncle had died and all that, if you went to the date 624, it was 1,929 days after Pope Francis became the Pope, which reminds me of the year the stock market crashed, which reminds me of the year of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which reminds me of how Vatican City was established in 1929 on the date 2/11, the same day that I went to my grandma's house and had all that eagle synchronicity. This is also the same day that Pope Benedict announced that he was going to be resigning in 2013, which then allowed Pope Francis to become the Pope. So just considering Pope Francis is 88 years old, that big number that was important to the stock market and the kneeling in Super Bowl 52, it's just an interesting thing to think about. And we just recently, I started this video a few days ago on February 13th, and then on February 14th, we got a story, so Valentine's Day, about how Pope Francis was hospitalized for bronchitis, So it's just interesting that Pope Francis will be in the hospital on Valentine's Day, which is also 59 days after Pope Francis's birthday. And think about Super Bowl 59, and think about how stock market crash equals 59, and Pope Francis equals 59. And then how Joe Biden met Pope Francis on the anniversary of the stock market crash. And it was linked up to Donald Trump meeting Pope Francis, and the Iowa Governor Kim Riddle's becoming governor that same day, and Herbert Hoover being the president from Iowa. That's connected to the stock market and the kneeling. It seems there's a lot of importance to Pope Francis. There's a lot of importance to Pope Francis this year. And remember, on that trip where Donald Trump met Pope Francis, that's when he first touched the Western Wall at 4:24 p.m., right? And his name in Hebrew, the Hebrew lettering equals 424, and you had them Jewish rabbi guys talking about Donald Trump being like the Messiah of Ukraine because some form of Messiah in the Hebrew language equals 424. And then you got the capital insurrection, and if you use the capital letter ciphers to type out Donald Trump in all capital letters, he equals 424. And, my dad's name equals 424. I'm thinking about it. And, I'm just thinking here. You got all the stuff with Donald Trump in the news right now with Vladimir Putin and Ukraine. We also have all the stuff with Dogecoin, right, going on in the media. Just once again, think about it in relationship to money. There's something going on with a money theme in the stock market. And it's the 95th anniversary, I believe, right? Hold on. 71. Yeah, right now we're in the 95th anniversary of the stock market crash, which is a number that's my whole life is synced around the number 95. So who knows? Hopefully I'll have a sweet year. Last year I had a pretty sweet year in relation to money, but I was born on like 95 degrees west. My Dan Barrett equals 95. Daniel Edward Barrett equals 95. All kinds of stuff. I was born in a dog year. Sirius equals 95. That's a big number in relation to the Jesuits and the Catholic Church as well. And I was born exactly 499 years after Martin Luther, and 499 is the 95th prime number. So, I'm just trying to think how that relates to Pope Francis. Maybe. Just seems there's something very important to him this year. Especially being hospitalized on Valentine's Day, he's synced to the stock market. We will see, I guess. I mean, even, it is the year 25, too. 2025, and Pope equals 25. I guess Trump also equals 25, right? Trump equals 25. And 88. So remember the time when Donald or Pope Francis called out Donald Trump for wanting to build the wall on the 25th day of the year? Remember that? Trump and Pope equal 25, and he said that uh, Trump shouldn't want to build walls; he should want to build bridges, right? Of course, Pontiff means bridge builder, and I think maybe that was 2018, right around the time of the Super Bowl 52. And once again, Pope equals 52, also, like, right? Just like Super Bowl 52. So we'll see. I'm done rambling here. I haven't made a video in so long. I was hoping it's hopefully it's halfway organized. Just kind of just going off the cuff and just talking and just trying to gather my thoughts as I'm going along here. But I'm honestly thinking about changing my name to Mystic Dan, my YouTube thing. Just cause I don't know, I need a change if I'm gonna start making videos, and maybe if I am gonna keep doing this, I'm gonna talk about some of these other smaller synchronicities that I have, because I have so many synchronicities all the time, and I think Mystic Dan is easy to remember. I mean, I'll leave a little Dan Barrett thing on there, but I don't know. Oh, I'm just something I've been thinking about. If I need a change, it's gotta. I don't know. I can't just continually just keep talking about doing the same things, I guess. And maybe that's part of the snake year, the Ouroboros and the new beginnings and whatever. But Mystic Dan's also hilarious because Mystic Dan won the Kentucky Derby last year, and it was all synced with my book, The Synchro Mystic. So I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it with a C, but I don't know. I don't even know if I'll even do that. Just I've been thinking about something like that, just to change it up. Maybe it'll inspire me. These videos are actually put on a local radio station. Actually, my friend Sam built a radio station, and in the last like week, I've had all these people that have been like, "You're on the radio," and I'm like, I've been on, yeah, probably for like a year now. It's just funny. Like, all these people are just like all excited about it, and like, I think it kind of inspired me to even make this video. So I'm like, oh, I don't know, maybe people will actually listen now. But it doesn't really matter either way, I guess. But I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to make this video, because a bunch of people were messaging me about it, and I was like, man, I need to make a video. I haven't made one in forever. But once again, it's also very hard. I have other responsibilities. I have kids, and they just happen to be usually gone on Friday at school and I usually don't work, and then on Sunday they usually go to their grandpas and whatever. But I have a lot of other stuff I have to do on Sunday, so I don't know. We will see, but have a good one. Peace.